It's very unusual for people to disappear into thin air. Most of the time, there are at least a few clues that tell us what happened to the missing person, even if we can't put it together. That isn't always the case, though. Number 5. On April 13th, 2011, a patrol car in Nevada stopped a dark green Subaru on the I-80. The driver was Patrick Carnes, an 86-year-old man who was traveling with his dog Lucky. Patrick was traveling home to Reno, Nevada after visiting family in Ohio. He'd been stopped for a minor traffic infringement. The patrol trooper had stopped an unrelated tractor-trailer rig, and Patrick had failed to move to the farthest lane away from the incident when passing them. The trooper decided to leave the stop he was on and pursue Patrick, who was quickly pulled over. Patrick had left Ohio the day before and explained to the trooper that he was planning to spend the night in the next town on his journey before making the rest of the trip. It was about 9 p.m. at the time. He told the trooper that he was following a tractor-trailer rig because the driver was going to Elko, a city in East Nevada, though why Patrick would have needed that assistance while traveling on the interstate isn't clear. It did appear that he was uncomfortable driving at night, as he told the patrol trooper that he would never do it again. The trooper let Patrick go without any punishment, and Patrick continued on his journey. This would be the last time anyone saw Patrick or his dog. The following morning, a dark green Subaru was found abandoned on the Pumpernickel Valley off-ramp. Patrick's belongings, including his wallet and checkbook, were found inside, leading police to rule out a robbery. The exit is just under a 2-hour drive from Elko, and the car would have been driven through Elko to get to the exit from where the patrol car had stopped Patrick the day before. Police tried to contact Patrick but received no response. They left the car there, but when it hadn't been moved in 2 days, police were sent to do a welfare check on Patrick. When they arrived at his home, they found Patrick's 2 sons, both looking for their father. He hadn't been in touch with them since the Ohio trip. Of course, Patrick wasn't home, and there were no clues to his whereabouts in his apartment. Patrick was old-fashioned and didn't have debit cards or credit cards that could be used to track purchases or a cell phone that could be traced. The area where Patrick's truck had been abandoned had been described as the Big Lonely. It's unlikely he would have just gotten out at that point and wandered off of his own accord. Patrick's family suspect a serial killer may be behind the disappearance. As Patrick isn't the only person to have disappeared in the area, there's little in the way of evidence, and it really does seem like he vanished into thin air. Number 4. Renee Kyles vanished without a trace after leaving her daughter's home on September 8, 2007. Renee was very close to her daughter, LaJoya. She'd moved to an area shortly after her grandmother was born to be close to them, and had a telephone conversation with LaJoya when Renee couldn't see her in person. There were no phone calls after September 8th, and when LaJoya couldn't get in contact with her mother, she filed a missing person report. It was soon discovered that LaJoya hadn't been the last person to see her mother. In fact, neighbors had spotted Renee later that day getting into a black Pontiac Vibe outside of her home. This wasn't Renee's vehicle, and it's not clear who was driving. The neighbors didn't see her return home either in the car or by foot, and she hasn't been seen since. On September 19th, Renee's car was found. This was a different vehicle than the one she was last seen in, and it's not clear when it was last seen before Renee disappeared. Her clothes and suitcase were found in the trunk of the vehicle. One window was smashed, but reports say it's unclear whether anything was stolen. There's also no information about whether Renee's ID, phone, or money was found in the car. Police had hoped to track Renee through the use of her food stamps, similar to how police use credit or debit card purchases to track a missing person, but her food stamps had not been used. When Renee had left her daughter's home, she told LaJoya she was planning to go home to watch a college football match. There was no mention of any planned getaway or any reason Renee would pack up her clothes. It later emerged that Renee had visited a local hotel the day before she was last seen. CCTV video showed her in the front lobby, but it's not clear whether this was related to the case or what she was doing there. Renee had bipolar disorder, and it's believed she hadn't been taking her medication at the time of her disappearance. It's possible she'd planned to run away with her family, though it seems unlikely given how close she was to her daughter and granddaughter. If this was the case, however, it doesn't explain why she left her clothes and her car behind. Police claim there was no sign of foul play in Renee's car, but they do believe that foul play was involved in her disappearance. Number 3. Ariana Davis has been missing for more than 10 years after she disappeared from her home in Henrico, Virginia in 2010. Ariana was 21 years old and was well liked within her community. She was studying to be a massage therapist and was due to be a graduate in June of that year. She lived at home with her parents and her brother, William, and rarely went out anywhere without letting someone know where she was. In fact, she'd never even spent the night away from home, so for her to disappear for an extended period of time was completely unheard of. Ariana and her brother were home alone on April 30th, 2010. William was home for most of the day but left at around 1 p.m. to visit his grandmother. He returned a short while later to find the house empty. The back door was open, and Ariana's ID and keys were found in the house. Roughly 15 minutes after she was last seen by her brother, Ariana was seen at a convenience store. The store clerk spoke to her, and she seemed her usual happy self. He sold her a cigar, and no local reports on Ariana's case referred to this being anything unusual. After leaving the store, she spoke with the mechanic who worked next door, telling him about her course and sharing that she was graduating in about 6 weeks. Ariana also spoke to a third man. Some reports say that she knew him well, but others indicate Ariana didn't know him at all. Ariana didn't return home and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Before long, police confirmed that they believed there was foul play in Ariana's disappearance. She didn't have a car, so it was unlikely she had the means to willingly run away unless she had an accomplice. Over the years, police have found multiple bodies, each time raising hopes for Ariana's family that an answer can be found at least, but so far none have seen a match. A few days after Ariana's disappearance, the unnamed man who'd been seen talking with her on the day she went missing was convicted for attacking another woman with a knife. Police haven't said whether he's a person of interest in Ariana's case, but it could be that this man had more victims than previously believed. Number 2. Dr. Cheryl Pearson disappeared in the early hours of January 5th, 2002. She was on call at the hospital and had severe diabetes, yet her pager and her medication were left at home. Despite a number of clues being uncovered by police not long after the disappearance, what really happened to Cheryl remains a mystery. Cheryl spent January 4th at a basketball game. She was single and went to the game alone, though some reports claim she was feeling weak and lightheaded during the game. She left the stadium at around 10:30 p.m. and planned to spend the evening alone at her apartment. Unexpectedly, 2 female friends came around to spend the evening with her. The 3 women enjoyed themselves for a few hours, and neither friend reported anything out of the ordinary, though Cheryl did mention she would be babysitting her sister's children early the next morning. Her friends left at about 1 a.m., and it was the last time anyone saw her. Cheryl's sister arrived as scheduled in the morning to drop off her children on her way to work. She found Cheryl's apartment empty and her car missing, and immediately reported her sister missing. It didn't take long for police to find their first clue. Cheryl's phone records showed she'd received a call about an hour after her friends left. Cheryl or someone else answered the phone. The call lasted just 5 seconds and originated from a payphone half a mile away. Cheryl's cell phone was found on her table along with her pager, so whoever answered the phone was more than likely at her home when the call was answered. It's hypothesized Cheryl received a phone call and left not long after, but it seems unlikely she would have left without her pager, even if she'd only expected to be out for a short time. Cheryl's car was found 2 days after she was reported missing at an apartment complex 2 blocks from her home. There were no signs of a struggle in the car, and in fact there was little sign of anything as the car had been completely wiped clean. There were no prints, not even Cheryl's. Police did find a medical bag containing Cheryl's personal items, including car keys in the trunk and an envelope with money inside the car, indicating that it wasn't a robbery. Cheryl's brother-in-law often came up in online conversations about the disappearance. He was awaiting trial for a bank robbery at the time of Cheryl's disappearance and had been since convicted. He was also the father to the children Cheryl was scheduled to be babysitting. He has an alibi for the night of the disappearance and isn't an official suspect. Cheryl has since been legally declared dead, but what really happened to her remains a mystery. Number 1. At around 4 a.m. on December 10, 1999, Michael Negret logged off of the online game he'd been playing. He was a university student, residing in UCLA's Dykstra Hall. The friend he'd been playing against was another student who was in another part of the dorm building at the time. Once the game had finished, Michael went to the other player to congratulate him in person. He was last seen leaving to return to his own dorm room. He was reported missing when his doormate awoke at 9 a.m. and found Michael gone, though his personal belongings, including his shoes, were still in the dorm room. Michael was a good student with no history of misdemeanors and no known enemies. He was doing well in university and had no known history of mental illness either. Even though it was the early hours of the morning, the university building was still relatively busy, especially as the week of finals grew near. However, nobody saw Michael after he left his friend's dorm room. A lack of security cameras at the time means Michael's movements after he left the room remain completely unknown. The complete lack of evidence or clues means a number of theories have been created over the years. Some believe Michael's disappearance was related to drugs, as his brother had later claimed he'd been experimenting with drugs at the time, and he'd been at a party before he went to bed for the night after playing video games. It seems unlikely he would have ever taken anything that significantly impacted his perception or reaction times, given he'd been playing a game that required concentration, but it's also possible his friends would have kept any evidence Michael was under the influence from police for fear of getting him in trouble. If Mike had been under the influence of drugs, he could have fallen into one of the open construction areas around the building, and his body would have been recovered when the work started the following day. Police used sniffer dogs and were able to trace Michael's scent out of the building and to a bus stop a few miles away. Given Michael had left his dorm room without his shoes, it seems strange he would have made the journey by foot, and the path the dogs traced changed directions abruptly, producing a weird zigzag pattern. This could have been because Michael was inebriated, but more likely it's that the dogs weren't tracking one single trip. Michael would have made hundreds of trips multiple times in his first semester of university, so it's possible the dogs had followed traces from multiple steps to the bus stop. Some students claim to have seen an older man in his 30s outside the building around the time Michael disappeared. He would have looked out of place, and the students were able to give enough of a description to form a police sketch, but it's never been determined if this man has anything to do with the case. It's likely somebody knows exactly what happened to Michael, but until they come forward, it's unlikely the case will ever be solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.